the Bushels and Beef Farm Tour and Podcast, where producers talk markets, share stories, and cut through the noise in agriculture.
Fire, bulls, and the board. That's what we're getting into today with Rich Knuppe, a livestock risk management specialist who also raises his own cattle in South Dakota. And if you're trying to figure out how to navigate a wild spring in cattle country, this one's for you. So welcome to the podcast, Rich, or Ricky here.
Good morning. Good to be here, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Definitely. So yeah, there's a lot going on right now, especially on the weather side. You know, we've got drought and fire in cattle country. Let's start there because if you're anywhere in the Dakotas, Wyoming, Nebraska right now, you already know what's going on, but paint the picture for producers who might be watching or listening to this from a distance.
Yeah. So, last year we started out in a D3, which means it's a pretty dang bad drought. A lot of the state kind of ended up getting out of that about May or June. It started raining. We at least got grass to grow, didn't necessarily run water, but we at least had grass to go out on. And then unfortunately about August, September, all of the moisture shut off. And now we are kind of back in that same boat coming into April. Where I live in the Black Hills, there's been approximately zero snow all winter. And what that means is that all of those streams are plumb dry. So a lot of our producers in that area, when they turn out to cattle and to go into the federal grounds to graze, now there's big water problems there. So I don't even know if they're going to be able to get turnout in a lot of those pastures. And then, everything rolls downhill. So a lot of the seasonal springs right now that generally guys can count on to get some water, they're not having any there. We just hit a D3 in a good portion of South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming again. So, the problem of hitting a D3 when you're coming out of spring or coming into April there is that all that grass that never, really grew in the fall last year. Well, it's dang sure not getting the start chance this year. And so these next couple months are going to be pretty big just for a huge area of cow-calf country and yearling country. And so, obviously, there's been a lot of people buying cattle with the idea of using these leases. And now there's kind of getting to be some pretty big question marks, or what are we going to actually have to use?
Yeah. And then Oklahoma, Kansas, and Texas, too, have all taken hits. And a really big number here, too, about 70% of the U.S. cattle are now in areas with abnormal dryness or drought, which is a big number there too to consider.
Yeah, it's kind of spooky when you actually look at the whole nation drought map. It's like there's obviously some areas that are getting hurt worse than others, but there's a pretty evolving trend there of looking like it. If we don't get something in the Midwest here quick, it's going to be from Texas on up to South Dakota. And obviously, that's going to be a lot of decisions guys have to make right now. And in our area, guys are trying to make some drought resistance plans, but we've been in the process of growing. And it's like, okay, do we get rid of that? Do we, pivot from that plan, or do we hold the course and hope that it rains? And I tell you, there's one person on every spectrum of that question. I know that.
Nearly 800,000 acres burned in Nebraska alone since mid-March. The Morrill fire is among the largest, burning through the sandhills in some of the most important cow-calf country in the country. Talk about the Nebraska fires a little bit more too.
Yeah, so we're just discussing how, the entire region is dry. We're already short grass, and now we're going to take 800,000 acres out of that in the heart of cattle country, heart of cow-calf country. It's just going to put the squeeze on everything else. And once again, us that much more dependent on the next couple of months getting moisture. And that, I've talked to some producers down there, and it's like, first of all, man, say a prayer for those guys. Cause I'll tell you, personally, we've gone through that with Atlas. We've gone through it with disease pressure. And it's like, it is a lonely feeling when you just don't know what your next step is. You're going through something nobody else can really relate to, except your neighbors, of course, in there. And so there's all sorts of relief programs out there, funding or donating hay. And so if you guys got anything to spare, please send it down to those guys, because we've been in that situation and it is tough. I had a customer went down there and he was buying some cows there south of Oglala, and he said it's not like it was just charred over, burned. It's because of sand underneath it, and so it burns it all the way down. He said it was like you were driving across the moon. It was just white everywhere. And the problem with that, where it's sand is so fickle, it's not good hard clay soil, and so if it starts blowing, it's not going to be good. And same thing if they don't get some rain, it's that rain will at least get some grass going where it can kind of hold that sand from blowing. And so they're just in a really tough shape. And the trouble is yeah, that one fire I think was 600,000 acres, but they keep. I mean, obviously we haven't had any more rain, so other fires keep on spouting up. I know us personally, it's like we're gonna go from our cake and pickup to our cake and pickup's what we feed. That's how we winter our animals, and we feed them cake. And it's going cake and pickup to the fire truck. And actually, I think our fire truck is on already. And it's like, that is a pretty piss poor spot to be on April 2nd. So it's just exacerbating the drought problem, exacerbating the grass problem. It's something that I think will only continue to worsen until we start getting hopefully some moisture here soon.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make too, is like, we see the fires, we know the after effects, but then it's not just like, oh, fire's done, let's get back to normal business. Like what you mentioned too, that sandy ground, can take years to get grass back. And then, it's not just the grass, it's fencing, hay stockpiles, water tanks, generational grazing land.
Yep. Yeah, just the psychology of all of that. He actually said he went into a gas station and kind of, wanted to talk to someone. He said there's a group of old cowboys sitting there having coffee, and he's like, you just don't even dare, stick your neck into it or stick your nose into it, because it's just like those guys are in a bad spot right now. So
Sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Sometimes you don't really think about the years after something like that. So definitely something to keep in mind here as those fires still continue on, or hopefully nothing new starts back up here. For someone who raises cattle yourself, how does this hit differently than just watching a market report? The market report swings a lot. Now we've got drought conversations, or not just conversations, it's actually happening right now, but talk through some of those emotions there.
yeah, so it's kind of like when you feel like you had the best laid out plans, you did everything. For example, what we did, we were able, because the bread market was so strong here in January and February and March, we were essentially able to trade out our old solid mouth and broken mouth cows and buy bred heifers, like a really, really good set of bred heifers. And so for us, it was like, oh, that makes pretty prudent sense. But our plan was, well, we have all this hay because up north we had a bunch of rain last year. Let's calve out all these cows, and then we're going to turn around and sell pairs and probably actually make more money than the bred heifers cost us, which was all fine and dandy. But then eventually you're sitting there saying, I'm going to look like an idiot if I just spent all this money, one, to take these cows through winter and then put the work into calving them and trucking them and tagging them, and then quite frankly probably going to sell into a drought area that nobody's looking for cattle. Then you're losing money on that as well. And so it's kind of one of those deals where it's like, God, the market's doing its job. We just need Mother Nature to get on board, and we can all have a good time. And so us personally, and I know a lot of the talked to producers yesterday, I'm taking phone calls quite a bit of, do you know anybody are taking in grass? Everybody knows grass is such a commodity out here. It's hard to find anyway, let alone in a drought. And so, one thing we did is we hooked up with a guy out east where they've got a little more moisture, got a little bit more feed crops and everything. We've sent cows out there, and we sent all our replacement heifers out there too, with the idea being, okay, first time I can really remember that, like, it was way cheaper to put an animal in a lot, whether it's replacing a heifer or a cow or anything for that matter, and grow it, as opposed to putting them out on grass. Grass right now could be from $50 to $90 a AUM, and you put them in on, in a lot, and shoot, it can be down to 45 to 70. And so a lot of what guys are doing is saying, okay, it's not ideal. Obviously, in our country, we love to run out on grass and take advantage of that. But if you've worked to grow your herd, and you don't necessarily want to get rid of that, it's like, well, we've got options where we can put them in a feed lot, or put them in some bigger lots, and maybe give them a little more care and kind of limp by and see what happens if we do get rain. Now, the other side of that is like, I guess we were kind of in that boat. It's like, okay, we're at or near the all-time high. If the cattle have kind of done what they've done, like, we can sell into a really high market. I mean, there's worse problems to have than being forced to sell to a really high market. And so I think some guys are thinking that. But also, guys obviously we've had record high prices year after year after year. We've been culling pretty hard this whole time. We're kind of running out of stuff to cull. And so that's when you have to start cutting into the heart of your herd, and that hurts a little bit more. I've been pretty fortunate that the sun shines on me sometimes. I've been pretty good about finding grass. It is getting harder and harder. I would feel a lot more confident of guys reaching out about moving east and trying to get in touch with someone over there. Now, whoever you do business with, if you're going to do that, if you're moving 4 or 5 hours away, obviously you're not going to be able to check those cattle very often. You better do some background checks, call their lenders. You want that to be a trusting deal because, I know everybody says, oh, it's a handshake deal. It's a great deal. Well, when you're talking $4,000 or $5,000 a head on cows, that can turn into big money at risk there in a real hurry.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about some bull sales seasons, or the bull sales season here. So, you've been out there. I know I've seen some posts here on your social media channels that you've been at the sales. You've gotten some good stuff going on. What are you actually seeing from producers right now related to the sale barn and bull sales this spring?
Well, we're cowboys, we're ranchers out there. The one thing you can count on is if we got jingle in our pocket, we're gonna spend it. And that has been the case at the bull sales this year. I'd say on average, year over year, it's been about $3,000 higher than last year's average, which last year's average probably was, record highs too. So I know I sound like I'm just repeating myself, but we have been just year over year. It's higher and higher and higher. And if you look at, the old adage is that you should spend 5 steer calves on a new bull. Well, that, if you figure $2,500, that comes out to around $12,000, and $12,000 for a bull to go on a commercial herd that's pretty expensive. But also those calves that we sold, those are worth quite a bit too. I'm kind of, obviously you can get into some really big money on these bigger bull sales, and guys have done very well with it, where they get those top end genetics and they get the growth, and sometimes they're rewarded for it. Me personally, I still think there's a lot of really, really good bulls guys can get in that $6,000 to $9,000 range and not be hurting your herd, still be advancing your herd. But it's no different. It's everybody's got their philosophy. In our case, we're grass cattle, we're range cattle. We don't want these big growthy animals, and so we want a moderate sized cow. And everybody says they want a moderate sized cow, but then they'll go looking for a huge weaning weight and a huge yearling weight. Well, eventually, if you do that long enough, then you don't have a moderate sized cow anymore. But I also understand the feeder side of it, where they're like, yeah, they're paying for weight. We want a big old framey sucker that we can feed up to 1,800, 1,900 pounds, because pounds pay. So it all depends on everybody's own operations. I will say heifer bulls have been at an absolute premium. So, I know they're saying, oh, we're not rebuilding the herd yet, but we raise a lot of heifer bulls ourselves at Trask-Angus, and we have taken a ton of calls of, I need more heifer bulls. I need more heifer bulls. I kept more heifers than I did last year. I bought heifers. And so when you start thinking of that in the drought, on top of it, these guys are still willing to say, those are obviously the ones that are very bullish, still saying, we're going to keep these heifers. We're going to get them bred some way, shape or form. So the sheer demand for heifer bulls out here, of good heifer bulls, I would say that we're definitely on the rebuilding side of it, and maybe those numbers change, and maybe this drought forces some of those animals that were going to get bred, maybe they do get into the go into the feedlot instead and get finished out. But I'd say right now it certainly looks that way. Now, also with that being said, if you're, we're at the smallest herd in history, well, rebound, starting to grow that herd, you're starting with a smaller amount. It's going to take a while before it gets big to where you're saying, okay, percentage wise, we are definitely going to grow. And then you start really, it's like starting your own cattle herd. If you start small, it's going to take a little while at first until you get a couple hundred head, and then you can really start expanding.
Let's talk about the younger and growing producer here, younger or the generational angle too. So bred cows and heifers at record prices that you've mentioned here. Young producers feeling like they're buying at the top. What do you say to them during this time?
Well, at least if they're feeling that, if they're cognizant of it, then they ought to be doing some kind of protection, because just like I'm saying, when you're selling into a drought, like if you just buy and say, boy, I hope this lasts 2 or 3 years and then I'll be good to go, I'll be set. That's what people did in 14, 15. Then they wound up paying on cows for 10 years. But, with the options that we have, I actually just met with a couple sale barn owners yesterday and said, paying $4,000 to $5,000 for a bred animal, that's a lot. Like, don't get me wrong, that's a lot. But we can LRP, I don't know, say a $2,500 calf for next fall. Okay, so you whop that in half, and then maybe you buy some puts against that animal, the cow. We can assure the calf, let's buy some puts against that animal. Yeah, well, I'd say we could get in that $5,000 range. And it's like, yeah, you might be giving up $100, $200 a head on that, which everybody's going to complain, oh, that's just more cost. But if you give up $200 to keep you from getting your head chopped off, I think that's a pretty good point. And then if we have that extra year, well, guess what? You're in the driver's seat on those cows too. And I understand that there's going to be your overhead cost to running that calf and getting it to the next year and all of that. But I certainly think in protecting that initial capital investment is money well spent for a young producer or for an old producer for that matter. I'm going to pivot on that because I talked to another sale barn owner the other day, and he was kind of belly aching about, LRP is a waste right now because I can't even lock in a profit. And he's like, we're in a position because we own our own feed, feed, and we raise our own cattle. Like, we can afford to take that risk. And it's funny because I'm not going to come after the guy or get in an argument with him, but it's like, so you're willingly saying you're willing to just give away your feed and give away the profit you could have on your animal just because you can afford to do that. And I think the guys that continue to grow are the guys that don't get to that level, that mindset. Well, I can afford to take that risk. Well, I can afford to take a risk too, but why would I? And given the chance that I can protect my worst case scenario and then come out whole while leaving the top side open, it's prudent business to me to protect the worst and hope for the best than to not do anything and then go to the worst and then you're in trouble. So for younger guys, and it's hard. It's really hard for younger guys because they're going to be pinching pennies anyways on there. And then we're going to say, oh, we want you to pay $90 to insure this calf and a couple $100 for the cow. And they're sitting there saying, well, that's adding to my expenses. I want to lessen my expenses. But I say it all the time. The most important expense you have is the one that protects the market because the market dictates everything else. I don't care if you got the best cattle or the best feed or the best mineral or cheapest grass. If that market's not there, you're in trouble.
A lot of like mindset shifting, kind of has to happen too with like, what if I miss the higher prices and then, start thinking about what happens if this thing drops, 30 to 50 cents. So that's always kind of tough to change, in a day. All right. Well, really appreciate you bringing both sides of this today, the specialist perspective and the producer's perspective. We covered the drought and fire situations across the plains and what's actually happening on the floor at the spring bull sales and how to think about LRP when cattle prices are where they are. So lots of good stuff here.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Yeah. If you're a cattle producer and want to talk through what any of this means for your operation, LRP coverage, or just making sense of the market backdrop, reach out to Rich and licensed livestock advisors at Logic Ag Marketing. They'll help you think through it. And the daily marketing newsletter is on the website at logicag.com, and it's worth a read every morning and afternoon. And thanks for listening.